Because if you were there for the morning session, you'll know that I do like to make it easy for you so you don't have to take lots of notes. But even before I do that, everything looks good at my end. I see my microphone moving. Are you hearing me and seeing the slide that says next steps? All right, I've got a couple of thumbs up. Good to go. Welcome back to many of you, and welcome to some of you. My name is Paul Peval, and I'm speaking to you again from the University of Calgary to talk this time about next steps with using NVivo for qualitative data analysis. Apologies for those of you who were unable to make it this morning for one reason or another. I did note your name, so I'll send you a link to that recording as well. And feel free to ask questions if something isn't making sense for you this afternoon, but chances are, if it's like a basic thing, it probably was covered in the morning session, and I may defer to that. So we'll see, but feel free to ask questions. I think, as I mentioned, I will send a link to this recording as well as a link to the slides that I'm using to introduce this afternoon session, and a link to the research guide that I will mention from time to time as well. This session I call Next Steps with Qualitative Data Analysis with NVivo. I used to call it intermediate level, but it really isn't any more advanced than what we covered this morning. It just happens to be, you know, once you've spent some time doing your coding, you've imported your documents, you understand roughly what's in them, there are a number of other things that you may want to be able to do with your project. So that's kind of the stuff that gets covered in this afternoon session. Feel free to ask questions as time goes on. If you'd like me to repeat anything or, you know, whatever, I've got the chat window open on another screen, and we'll try to remember to pay attention to that. You can also unmute yourself, so if you want to do that, if you'd rather do that, feel free to do that as well. And just a reminder that we are scheduled for about an hour and a half this afternoon, so that I guess puts us at what, 2:30 for a expected finishing time. The agenda for what I'd like to cover, and again, if there is something that you don't see on this agenda that you think is important for your project, for the type of data that you're dealing with, or just any questions that you have in general that aren't covered by this, again, ask. I do want to cover data privacy, so how to password protect your projects. While I'm in that area, I'll show you a couple of other settings and options. In the morning session, I talked a bit about queries. I showed you a couple of very basic ones, kind of one-click type queries, but I'll show you some more advanced things that can help you discover information within your projects. I didn't, for the first time ever, I think, mention one of the more advanced capabilities within NVivo, which is cases and case classifications, and I usually mention that in passing during the morning session. This is the ability for NVivo to understand, if you will, demographic characteristics about your participants. So if you imagine that you've got survey participants who may have answered some questions along the lines of what's your age, your gender, your years of employment at the University of Calgary, highest level of employment, whether or not you like dogs and cats, could be anything that could be used to classify different people. NVivo can help you slice and dice your data. So any of the codes that you've assigned to content, you could then further say, so for you know, any code that mentions environmental change, just show me the words that were spoken by women. Just show me the words spoken by men. And NVivo can't tell you if there's anything significantly different about those words, but it can very easily allow you to see those words depending on who spoke them, and then allow you to make some sort of a decision. You know, do older people talk about different things than younger people? That kind of thing. So we'll definitely spend some time this afternoon about talking about how NVivo can do that. And then probably very briefly surveys. And I mentioned in a disparaging way auto coding, automatic coding in this morning session. I was telling you that the AI, if you want to call it that, behind the automatic coding is kind of garbage, but there are a couple of auto coding capabilities that aren't related to the themes or the nodes that can be useful. So again, assuming I have time, I'll talk about what those are and show you some examples of those. I still am not an expert in different research methodologies, so I will remind you once again that there's an excellent resource called Sage Research Methods. Again, you'll have a link to, or you'll have a copy of this slide, which includes a link to Sage Research Methods. So just a reminder, it's a great resource to discover all the ins and outs of various research methodologies. So good thing to know about. So data privacy, kind of one of the more unique things about qualitative data. Well, I guess it's not unique to qualitative, but it certainly comes into play. You know, you're dealing with words that may have been either spoken to you if you've got a transcript of a recording, or typed to you if you've got a survey, words that were spoken kind of in confidence and in private, right? Chances are, if you have collected information from one of those sources, again, interviews or surveys, you probably had a privacy statement there saying that you wouldn't share your data, share people's data. But even more legally, I guess, the Tri-Council agencies have a statement that says you have the ethical duty, or that the ethical duty of confidentiality includes obligations to protect information from unauthorized use, access, disclosure, modification, loss, or theft. So if you are working with grant money from the Tri-Council agencies, they expect that you will keep data secure. So all of that boils down to the fact that the project that NVivo creates, the file that it creates, which is the project file, by default has no security on it. If you sent me your NVivo project file, or if I found a USB stick with your NVivo project file on it, I would be able to open it. And depending on how you put your data in, I may be able to attribute specific words to specific people. So that's probably not a great idea. So what I want to do is show you the very easy way that NVivo can allow you to password protect your project. You don't have to, but pretty good idea to do so. So let me show you how to do that. I left it open. I'm still in the sample research data, the sample project, environmental change down east. So we're looking at NVivo. It'll look the same to many of you and completely new to those of you who weren't there in the morning session. But just to refer you to the tabs that are up here, one of them is the file tab. So the purple one that's in the upper left, that's where you'll go if you want to change any of the settings, either within the software itself, so as a whole, or specific to an individual project, which is what I'm showing you in this case. So there are actually two places or two sections that you might have to change settings depending on what you're trying to do. But when I hit that file tab, one of the first, the first thing that comes up is project information here, and then project properties. So when I choose that, I get some additional information about this specific project. I mentioned this morning that this sample project called Environmental Change Down East, here is the background information on it. And this was manually entered, so some researcher entered that information. I also showed when I was first firing up the software that NVivo kind of keeps a track of where your project file is. And this is another place that you can figure that out. It kind of shows the path right here on the main screen here. And I also told you, don't do as I am currently doing, which is don't work on a project while it's in a shared location. Just happens to be the last place I had this particular project, but you do run the risk of corrupting your project file if it is in a cloud location such as OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox. I believe iCloud as well would fit into that, even if iCloud is part of your desktop kind of environment. That one gets a little bit hazy, but best practice is to run your NVivo project file from your hard drive specifically. So a couple of interesting things that you note, or that you could note there. But what I'm after right now is this third tab on the first row called passwords. And there are actually two spots here. Read write password is appearing to, ask for some information. And then there's also an option for a read only password, which I can't actually interact with until I have a read write password. Read write password is probably all you're going to do, and that is what you would consider a password. Without this password, nobody would be able to open your project file, basically. With this password, you or anybody else could open it and also interact with it or do stuff with it. So that's the read write component. There may be times when you want to share your project with somebody but don't want them to have the ability to make any changes to your project. If you should find yourself in that situation, you don't trust your supervisor, you don't trust your research colleague or something along those lines, you could set a separate read-only password. So that's why that's there. There are a couple of things to note on this password screen. First of all, being there is no guidance on how secure that password must be. It doesn't say it has to be 26 characters with 14 capitalizations and 3 punctuations. In fact, you could enter a single character and it would take it. Don't do that. That's not great password security. Kind of, why would you bother? Geez, I forgot what key I hit already, so I'm taking that out. So do make it somewhat secure, an actual password kind of thing. But I'll also point out that the other thing you won't see here is any opportunity to recover your password or reset your password. It lives within the software. There's no cloud database. There's no place to retrieve it. It's just in the software. So keep that in mind as well. Don't forget your password. Write it down, use a password management package, perhaps leave yourself a password hint. I'm gonna, again, not do what I told you to do. I just added 123 as the password there, and I could say, something like that as my reminder of what it should actually be. Once I've done that, now, as soon as I hit OK, nothing changes. It doesn't kick me out. But if I do close the software, yeah, I do want to save it because I made a change here. The next time I attempt to open this particular specific project, NVivo will prompt me for that password. So let me just show that off. I'm going to remind myself not to shut down the entire software package, just close that project, and then that'll save us 17 seconds each time. In this case, I'm just going to choose the most recent project that I had been working on, and this time it does not let me in. If I enter the wrong password, nope. It's standard password behavior. If I needed to see the hint, I could do that. But as soon as I do enter that, I'm back in the project. So pretty straightforward, but you do need to know where that is. So again, that's up under File and Project Properties. And I can easily clear that password if I want to. One of the other things that I did want to show, though, is on the main tab when you first come in, this general tab where you've got information about the project itself. I mentioned during one of the query types that I showed this morning that there is a stop words list that's built into the software. And this is where you can access and see that right here in the middle of the screen where it says text content language. The default is English US. There is an English UK, which you would think might be more appropriate for us here in a Commonwealth country, but it turns out that for whatever reason, the stopwords list are actually identical. There are no British spellings on the stopwords list, so it doesn't really matter which one you choose there. The fact that there are these other 6 or so languages lets you know that, in fact, you could import any language into the software. So you could code, I don't know what language is it on here, Farsi, something, and it'll work as long as you can read that language. You can code just as you would any other language, but there are stopwords lists for each of these languages. And what that means, if I click on the stopwords list, I don't think I can blow that up, but it'll show basically all of the words that NVivo ignores. So the fact that none of these words appeared on our word frequency query from this morning is due to the fact that those words are here in the stopwords list. So even if the word again had appeared more frequently than the word east, it basically just would not appear. I can add words to this. So I can add at any point the word. So, if east had turned out to be kind of a garbage word, I can simply add it here. One that you might actually find useful, if you add Calgary, basically NVivo will not report that it sees the word Calgary. So maybe in your interviews, people kept just mentioning the fact that, yeah, I live in Calgary, and that turns out to be more noise than of real use. You can tell NVivo basically to ignore it. When I hit OK, it kind of just disappears. When I go back in, those words are still in there, but they file alphabetically. So there's East. Here's Calgary, which is no longer capitalized, which tells you that it doesn't care about capitalization. So you can reset this list to get rid of those 2 words. You could delete half or all of the list. You can add as many words as you want to the list. The other important reason to know that this exists, though, is that in addition to these words being invisible on a word frequency query, they're also invisible in a word search query. So I showed you, I think I had done a search on water quality, the phrase water quality. The first time that this kind of reared its head and made me realize that it's important to know about this, I was helping a researcher do some work on some emails, printouts of emails, many of which, not all, but many, had the kind of the default tag at the end, sent from my Android device, sent from my iPad, that kind of thing. And she wanted to use that as a bit of a proxy for how many Android or Apple users were involved in this particular data set. And so we did a search on the phrase sent from my, and NVivo said, no, can't find it. Don't see any mention of that anywhere in this data set, even though we were looking at that phrase on an email. And it turns out that the words from and my both appear in this stopwords list. So NVivo basically said, no, I couldn't find them because they were in here. So there may be some times that you are expecting words to appear and they don't. It may be because, they're, for the most part, noise type words, but they may be of importance or interest to you. So definitely something that you should know exists there. So, and then just to take a peek, so German, I think it's a much shorter list, but those words are invisible to the software. Don't know if that's a long list or not, but that's basically how that works. There's probably not anything else in this area that you'll really play around with. I've never really had to make any changes other than knowing about those. I did mention the use of initials when you first install the software, and this is kind of where NVivo keeps track of that. So I didn't show it this morning, but it's possible to determine who made a change to any particular piece of the project. In fact, off to the right here, I happen to be looking at this list of documents, and the last person who modified it, WWS, appears to be Wanda Swope. That one PDF that I imported, the PCCF end user license, is assigned to me, PRP. So that's where that kind of information lives. And I think, yeah, so I could change it there as well if you really wanted to. I'm not sure if that will automatically, yeah, it doesn't change stuff that's already been done. So that's kind of interesting to note. And I'm just going to change it back because someday that would just confuse me. So yeah, you might poke around in there. Remember that the project properties are assigned to this one specific project. If I fire up a brand new project, import new documents, they are going to all have the default settings. So no password, the default dictionary, stop words dictionary, that kind of thing. So I should probably change that back as well. I mentioned, though, that in the file area, there are other settings that you might play with. So it's good to know where they are. So here for options is the software as a whole. And again, most of this stuff is probably fine as it is. Another place I could change my initials if I wanted to. But there are a couple of other places that, or a couple of other things that you might care about. The user interface language. So that's the text of the menus and such, the language that's looking at you as far as the software is concerned, not the content. If you are not an English native speaker, but you are one of these, then you might decide to change the interface language. So it's kind of neat to know that you could do that. The default is that you are coding entire words. What that means is if you're dragging your mouse across some text and you don't, you accidentally miss the first character of a word, NVivo will automatically pick that up for you. There might be occasions, maybe you're doing emojis or something like that. There may be instances where you need to just pick out a section of a word. So if NVivo is not letting you do that, maybe come back here and do that as well. Simon's mentioning paragraph styles looks useful. So up here, it is possible to tweak your paragraph styles once you've got some content in here. Generally, I mean, while it's nice to be able to do that to documents that may already be living in your project, I find that if at all possible, do any of your formatting outside of NVivo. For whatever reason, well, I guess because it's not a word processor, you just won't have as many choices. So yes, with the paragraph styles, but if there was other formatting that you really wanted to change, it may be difficult to do that within NVivo. So keep that in mind. But yeah, here's certainly something that you might find useful to play around with as well. If only for readability within the software. You've got this one color here. Maybe you decide you'd like your headers to be a different color. So could be something worth playing with. Notifications, I showed you, and we'll see it again this afternoon. The default is that it will pop up every 15 minutes to remind you to save stuff. Probably a good idea to keep that, but if it's really annoying, you can turn that off. And I don't think, again, there's much else that you would play with here, but keep it in mind that is there, and that whatever I change here will stick, and the next project that I work on will have these same settings as well. So the difference between application options and project options or project settings. And I think that's all I wanted to show from those two sections. Yeah, so I'm actually almost done with the slides, and we're going to go into the software to show off the rest of the stuff there. But just a reminder, the same reminder that I gave you this morning, when you're in the software, it's quite easy to get sidetracked, follow the rabbit down a funny looking hole and say, you know, what's that feature all about? And that's a great way to kind of explore and learn the software, but it's not going to help you answer your research question. So if you are pressed for time and you're not the kind of learner who learns well that way, just make it a habit of remember, you know, okay, I'm sitting down to work with NVivo. What is it specifically that I'm using that software to do? I have a research question where I interviewed these people in order to do what? And when you remind yourself of that, that will really help you decide which features within NVivo to use. And so again, yeah, don't let NVivo drive your research. You drive NVivo. And I don't have it on the screen here for some reason, but remember that I'm here. So if and when you do have questions, remember that you can reach out to me. You'll have my email when I send you this link, if you don't already have it already. And in fact, on my email, in my signature is a link to book an appointment with me, and that can be either in person or via Zoom. You don't ever have to reach out ahead of time to say, can I meet with you? You can just hit that link, and if it links to my calendar, just book it on in. You know, if you know that tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you need to get an answer, I'm happy to help with that. So do remember that I'm there as well. So let me jump back to the agenda because I think I don't use the slides elsewise. Yeah, you'll have the slides, so there's some screenshots in there. But yeah, what I'm going to be doing next is actually showing you kind of backwards from here, showing you the importance of these cases and case classification information, the demographic information that I talked about. I'll show you how that can be used in a query, which will then kind of probably get you excited for using that kind of information. Again, if it's important. If it's not important for your research question to know that men and women talked about something differently, then don't track that information. So again, kind of keep that in mind. So give me just a quick sec. So I'm in the project, the same sample research project. I will be starting a brand new project a little bit later this afternoon to show you how that all comes together. But what I wanted to do is show how this demographic information can be useful, and then kind of show, you know, how it gets in there. And along the way, I'll show a couple of other queries. This morning, we looked already at a word frequency query, which is simply a count of the most frequently occurring words, either in the entire project, in a particular node, in a particular document or group of documents. Also, the ability to search through all of the text or specific text, so a text search. I hinted at the coding type query, and I will come right back to this after I do the next one. The coding query is what allows you to say, you know, show me overlap, or show me not just one of these nodes, but anything that mentions either balance or policy management, that kind of thing. So I'll come back to that. And a reminder, this is still an introduction to the capabilities of the software. So right now, I'm choosing a crosstab query, but if you don't remember what the heck that is later, that's okay. Just remember that, oh yeah, he was able to do some type of query. Remember, you can go up to the question mark and even just type in queries, and it will list all of the availables and tell you which one you might want to do. There's also a query wizard, which kind of walks you through, asks you what is it that you're hoping to get out of whatever it is you're about to do. But I'm about to do a crosstab query, and the reason the reason that I'm doing that is because it makes very quick and easy use of the classifying information that I mentioned. So again, the fact that NVivo can know, and I put know because obviously it doesn't have knowledge, but you tell NVivo that your data has the following qualities. So from an interview with a person, that person has the characteristics of, you know, age, gender, how long they've lived in a particular area, that kind of thing. So here's how that can work within NVivo. So in a crosstab query, it's expecting, first of all, if you stop to read, it says add some codes over here. So policy management, whoops, there we go. My dragging is not seeming to work really well today. And let's also say real estate development. If my mouse continues to misbehave, I could also use this plus key right here and just pick off a particular node or several nodes. So right now, I'm saying to NVivo, of all of the text that I found, that I have assigned, I'm currently interested in policy management and infrastructure. But I don't just want to see the nodes, I want to see them characterized or split up according to certain characteristics. So over here on the right-hand side, I have the ability to choose attributes that have been assigned, and that'll come next, but that have been assigned to each piece of data in my project. I mentioned age group a couple of times, gender, education level. Now this can be anything. Again, I joke, but it could be dog lovers versus cat lovers, or pet owners versus non-pet owners, or people who love the winter and people who don't love it. It can be anything that makes sense to help you understand your research participants, basically. So if I simply leave it at age group, though, and then run the query, I'm about to say, show me everything that deals with policy management and or infrastructure, but split it by age group. So when I run that, it simply comes back with a basic, I guess it's a chart. Looks like an Excel sheet. It's not a chart, a spreadsheet. Anyway, let's talk about what it's showing us here. The first thing that I like to do, though, is go up here in the upper left-hand corner and pick any color scheme. Doesn't matter which. The colors have zero meaning, just like any of the other colors we saw this morning. They're simply a way to draw your eyes to a difference on the screen. So in this case, I chose, I forgot, I guess this light to dark green. And what that is meaning is that dark greens are zeros. Anything that's a white is a higher number, and anything in between is a lighter number. So the idea here is, if you ever really filled up the screen with one of these sheets, it may make it very easy for your eye to say, oh, well, that's different. Let's kind of focus in on that. But what we're looking at with these numbers is, again, the node in question, so policy management or infrastructure, and then by age group. So 30 to 39, 40 to 49, et cetera, et cetera. The words do not appear here in this chart. The numbers are referring to, and it tells us up here, the number of cases coded. And I skipped ahead and I didn't tell you that cases are individual people. So every participant that you care to track this way is a case. So Bob is a case, Mary is a case, Paul could be a case if I was in here. And then each of those cases has characteristics such as the age group, or attributes rather, or characteristics, but age group, gender, that kind of thing. So the number in this case is the number of cases. So the number of people in the 30 to 39 year cohort, 3 of them spoke about infrastructure. None of them spoke about policy management. And so those numbers themselves could be interesting. You could change that number to the number of coding references. So remember that the references are the number of chunks of text. So in this case, there was no change. It's still 3, but in this case, it's 3 chunks of text. So it tells me each person spoke about it one time. To get to the actual words, double click on the cell in question. And so now I'm looking at the words, and this shows me that the words all came from the survey, not from my interviews. And here they are. So these are 3 survey participants who filled out a very small question in the survey. that related to, I forgot what I clicked already, infrastructure, and they came from the 30-year-old cohort. So the idea would be now I'd look at the older folks or go all the way to the oldest folks where there were none. But here's a group. So the 70-year-olds, I could open that up, double click, interview in this case, and the survey responses, but I would read these words and make a decision as to, oh, well, that's really interesting. The older people are talking about this one thing and the younger people aren't. And then I could include that in my write-up as the case may be. Tinu, your question about populating the attribute, that is coming. So I haven't mentioned it, but I will. So that is important to know, though, because you got to get that information in there somehow. Two other things to kind of note about this screen, and then I'll show you something even slightly more advanced. I reminded you this morning, or I told you that NVivo really likes to make use of the scroll bar area. And so we have a couple of different tabs over here now. The default view is here, but it's also possible to get a basic visualization of that same data. Personally, I don't like the 3D chart. You do have some options up here for other chart types. So maybe that makes more sense. Maybe that one does. I'm not sure what would be most appropriate here. If you're at all competent in Excel, chances are you'll be able to do at least a good a job, if not better, doing it yourself. And much as I showed you with that word cloud export, it's also possible to export this tabular view. So again, from any particular screen, if I right mouse click, I have the option here to export cross-tab results, and it's going to come up with a default of Microsoft Excel. So you could change that to different versions, even SPSS if it made sense to do so, or a straight text file, but probably Excel would be what you'd choose. And then you'd be starting with this same piece of information, and then you could chart it any way that you preferred to. The other thing that I wanted to show you, it's not such a big deal here, but you do note that I've got to kind of scroll back and forth a little bit. If you should run into an output here that is just very cumbersome to deal with on the screen, one of the easiest things you can do is all the way up here at the top is this transpose button. It's the exact same output. It simply flips the X and Y axis, basically. So now my age group is over here on the left and my nodes are on the top. And in fact, this is, to my eye, a lot easier just to kind of eyeball than the kind of the default view there. Here I've got to scroll right and left. I can't see the older folks and the younger folks together. So just by hitting transpose, that can be pretty helpful to do. It is possible, and again, this is fun for just exploring, but it may be vital for your research. Again, depending on what your actual question is. Maybe not only do you care about age group, but you care to know whether or not the people who have responded here are involved in recreational fishing. So you care about both of those concepts. So it's possible to do two. You cannot do more than two, and it'll kind of become clear in a moment why you might not want to anyway. But if I add that additional attribute and rerun the query, it becomes quite a bit more busy already. And so what I'm looking at, again, the nodes, in this case, only two of them. I could have put multiple, all of them, theoretically. And now, because age group is on top, followed by recreational fishing, my age group is now split by those attributes. So age group, the 30-year-olds, not fishermen, yes, fishermen, people, fisher people. Same thing with the 40-year-olds, all the way down to the 80-year-olds. And so again, it's pretty cool to be able to slice that precisely into your data. But if your research question doesn't require it, then don't bother. You know, it's extra work to set up NVivo to be able to do that. If you don't like the way that looks, you could swap those two attributes, rerun the query, And again, this is the exact same data, it's just presented in a slightly different way. And again, in this case, I think this is a little bit easier to look at. So now we have 44 people, n equals 44 people who are not recreational fishing people, 60 people who are, and very easy to see the different age groups and whether or not they had any speaking there. Again, if you don't like blue, or sorry, if you don't like green, you could change that to red. You could have multicolored. Just kind of makes it easier to see. And then the chart is going to get super busy. So again, probably not useful to actually chart that, but I wanted to show off at least some of the visualizations. They're just not awesome, in my opinion. So neat to be able to do this. Before, I definitely should have shown the previous query first, because we'll come back to this, but I do want to show you that other type of query just because I mentioned it. If I go to Explore and Coding Query, sometimes I lament that they have different interfaces or different kind of wizards leading into each of these types of queries. But then I guess, well, you know, you're asking for kind of different information. Eventually, it'll start to make sense. But you do have to stop and consider what the screen is presenting to you. What it's asking for now is you have the ability, but the default is that all of the following must be true. Something must be coded at a specific code or case, and then you have the ability to add additional attributes there. You could also change that to any of the following might be true, and I'll show you why you might care to do that. But the way this all works is, again, considering these nodes, these themes, perhaps you wanted to find that overlap that I mentioned this morning. So you could say coded at all of the selected codes or cases. You hit this little ... the ellipses here, and then you're presented with a list of the nodes. And you could say, so it's got to be in infrastructure and it's got to be in policy management. And then you'd say, okay. And if that's all you cared about, we could run the query and find out whether or not there was any text, and there is. So the default is it comes in and shows you the references. So there's not a lot, but we could also see the summary. It comes from 4 different places, and then you've got those references, and then it again kind of separates it by the type of document. Personally, when I run these types of queries, I don't include more than one on a given line. The reason being, if this had come back with a 0, I would, in this case, it's not a big deal because it is only 2, but you know, if I built myself a very complex query, I wouldn't be sure which one to kind of fiddle with. And so what I like to do is one at a time. So I'd say all of the following: coded at infrastructure. Then I'd hit the plus and coded at whatever else I'd said. I forgot already. Was it community change? It was probably policy management. But this will be a good example. And then I could say, and it also has to be at policy management. So now I'll run the query, and I suspect it'll say, no, I was expecting a 0. Far fewer, but we still have some results. Had I gotten a 0, it would be a lot easier for me to make an educated guess and say, oh, it's probably that community change, and just knock that one out like that, as opposed to having to kind of click back in and unselect and reselect. So by keeping things one line at a time, personally, I think it works a little bit easier. But just for fun, I forgot what I chose again. Infrastructure, policy management, and yeah, totally blanked. I'm not paying any attention to the words I'm saying out of my mouth. Yeah, all right, so we have some results. But the other cool thing that you can do is, you know, you've got your results here. Coding Stripes is still available to us. So we can both confirm the fact that all 3 of those things appear. So again, infrastructure, policy, real estate development. There's real estate, policy, infrastructure. So those are all there. But we could theoretically figure out what else is there. So I'm seeing community change. appear not on all 3 of them, but at least 2 of the 3. It's not down there. So different things that you've used in different parts of your project are still available, even though we're in a whole different kind of component of the project. So it's kind of nifty, I think. The next thing I'm going to do is go back to those attributes, show you where they live and how to get them into NVivo. But let me stop and ask if you do have questions on either of these queries that I've shown you. Not expecting that you remember exactly how we got here, but you know, they exist. Are there other types of queries you can imagine, either with this data set that you've seen or that you think you might have use of in your projects that you wonder if NVivo can do this? All right then. When we first came into the project this morning, I showed you the data area and the codes area. Now we're in the cases and case classifications area. So again, we didn't talk about that this morning. Cases, if I expand that, is where NVivo kind of has a holding place for each of the individuals. NVivo has almost no ability to infer this data. I say almost because if you import a survey, which also includes this kind of demographic data, NVivo really will almost build it all just as we see it here. But if you are simply importing, say, a Word document, a transcript, there's no way that you can embed the metadata in the transcript in such a way that NVivo will say, oh, I see that you've brought in something from Mary, who is a woman with these characteristics. You do have to separately tell NVivo how to do that. I'll bet you $1,000 will only ever have one type of case. So in this case, there's both people and places. So the places could also have characteristics. Again, remember that this is NVivo showing off all of the capabilities it has. In reality, you are probably only going to ever have people, and they are likely to be one type of person. So interview participants. In this case, there's a separate one for survey respondents. They could actually have the same type of case, if you will. They are in fact all people. And so note something else that I haven't really drawn your attention to. I did point out that in the documents area, NVivo tries to give you a hint as to what type of document it is. And I didn't show, but you'll recall that in nodes, there's a different looking icon that's trying to show what a node is. And when we're finally down here into the people and the cases and case classifications, it's now a multicolored little icon that's attempting to show that there are multiple components to it. So 4, but could be any number of things there. And so this view of the cases is simply showing the people. But when we get down to the case classification, this is where that information actually lives. So Barbara has these characteristics, which I'll show you how to introduce to NVivo. So we know this about Barbara. She comes from a place called Straits in a community called Betty. She's lived for 2 generations in this community. She's not involved in commercial fishing, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll draw your attention to the fact that in this sample project, we also have the survey participants. They also are people, and they have slightly different characteristics because I guess they, the survey asked them different questions. So for instance, actually, if I open up one that's closer, Ken as an individual interviewee has an awful lot of things that were unassigned. So apparently we did not ask Ken about his commercial fishing and his opinions on the pace of change, but we did definitely ask the survey participants. So you can mix and match, but as I say, chances are you'll probably just have one piece of data set up that way. Where this information originally originated, if I may be redundant there, was from a spreadsheet. So let me remember where I put that. So I am simply on my hard drive, and this is not the same spreadsheet. I think. Trying to remember if I even have any of the sample data set here external and on my hard drive. I'm sure you just got that as well. I forgot that emergency update was coming today. Okay, so what we're looking at, this is in fact the classifying sheet for the people who filled out the survey that are included in the sample project here. So you'll see the same respondent numbers, DE005, et cetera, et cetera. So there's DE22. So the way you would introduce this to NVivo is through a spreadsheet similar to this. Doesn't have to look identical, but the format is as follows. You always want to have, and it should in fact be the first row here. I'm not sure why it isn't, but a unique identifier. That is how NVivo is able to keep each of your participants separate. It's not anything super fancy. In this case, it's just a number. So DE001, DE002. That guy should be James Bond. Who knows? You don't have to include, in fact, you probably don't care about the return date, but the survey software collected it in this case. And then each of your variables. In many of these cases, and this is not the perfect example to show you because this is a bit of a mix, these may be fields that you care to actually manually code, depending on what the response is there. You know, you want to find out whether something is positive or negative. But in this particular spreadsheet, here are all of those classifying pieces of information. So this is the stuff that makes one person different from another or allows you to lump them together because they all did commercial fishing or they didn't, that kind of thing. I do have a much simpler one to show you, and that's the one that I'm actually going to bring in to show you how to tie it all together. Here's one which is just a very small list of people who are who were interviewed and whether or not they had anything to do with volunteering, I think is what this one all boils down to. So here is the specific unique identifier. Again, it's unique in this data set. It's not unique in the world, but there is only one Anna. So NVivo will be able to track the fact that anytime I say that I'm working with Anna's document or Anna's words, these are the characteristics that always will go along with it. And one of the kind of nifty it seems like magic to me, if you will, is that you can add this information at any time. It could be the first thing you add to your project. It could be the last thing you add to your project. But as soon as you tie this information to a document, to Anna's interview, all that information will automatically be available to you to query against. So you could then immediately start to say, show me the information spoken by or typed by females versus males. Again, even if it's the last thing that came in there. My phone keeps going off, so give me just a second to tell it. Yeah, I saw it already. Okay, it's because there's lots of alerts, not just the one. Okay, so again, a slightly different view of it, much less information, but it shows that, again, you could have almost any piece of classifying information, you know, country of birth, whether or not you've ever done or are currently being paid, yes or no, that kind of thing. So I'll keep this up for just a second to refer back to, and then I'm going to actually do a brand new project to show you how to bring that in. So we are on Alert Wednesday. And I will this time not put it in OneDrive. So I'll put that in my documents. It's got the name. And again, I don't think I remembered to mention this morning. This alertwednesday.nvp, that is your project file. Anything and everything that you bring into the project, so documents, classifying sheet, all the coding that you do, it all lives in that one project file. So that's the one thing you need to pay attention to and remember where it is. If you were to share it with somebody, you just need to share that one project file. It's not the project file plus your documents from somewhere else. So it's all there. So I'm just creating this. I tell it to save it there. And I will now have a brand new blank project, which will look all nice and shiny. There's nothing in files. There's nothing under nodes. There's nothing under cases or case classifications. Okay. First thing, though, you do need to have the documents in question. So that's the first thing that I'm going to bring in. I've shown you already that you can just drag documents in. This time I will import. And I'm going to go to the documents that I believe go along with this classification sheet. So that's the classification sheets, I think. Yeah, so there's the interviews. You'll recognize the same names. And it's importing, well, I guess downloading and then importing. I could actually create a case for each imported file here. I'm not going to, because usually I drag stuff in and then do the cases after the fact. And I'll also give you a warning, I guess, if you will. This particular process is kind of messy and cumbersome. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts that you won't remember exactly how to do that. And that's fine, because again, you've got me, you've got the little question mark up there. You will be able to figure it out, but this is not the type of procedure. It's not as simple as coding, for instance. It's just not terribly intuitive, the number of steps you need to do. So don't feel bad. And I'm not going to feel bad if by the end of this, you're not 100% with me. So we'll leave it at that. So I'm bringing in a half a dozen or so interview transcripts, and then I'm going to assign those attributes to these transcripts. So here's Anna, and it's a transcript, very similar to the other things that we've seen. Again, no cases, no case classifications, but that's the next step. I've got this information about each of my participants. I do need to close this spreadsheet before bringing it in, otherwise NVivo will complain. So I'm about to do that. But then I believe, yeah, I don't think it matters from where I do it. I have this option up here for case classification, either to create it manually, which there may be times that you do it. Maybe you don't have a spreadsheet. Maybe you just got one or two variables that you care about and you don't want to put it in a spreadsheet. So you can do this manually. But in my case, because I already have that spreadsheet, I'm going to import my classification sheet. And it gives me a little wizard. I'll browse to the location of that same area. So there they are. And there's that classification sheet. Same thing we were just looking at. And when I open it, next, I do have a few things that you'll probably leave as default, but do double check. There are actually two types of classifications. File classification would come into play possibly if you were doing a literature review and you were only working with journal articles. They would not be considered people, they're files, right? So for some reason, NVivo gives you the opportunity to treat them differently. They could have the same types of classifying information, but yeah, I guess they don't. There'd be more bibliographic information as opposed to demographic information. But every once in a while, you may find yourself looking at a screen that says, oh, I'm about to do something with a file classification, and you in fact want to do case classification. So keep that in mind. Because we're just starting out, we do in fact want to create new attributes if they don't exist, because they won't. There are no existing items, and there are no existing values for items, so all of those are fine. The reason you might want to think about those is that, again, it's possible maybe you interview some additional people towards the end of your project. You hadn't planned to, but you needed to for whatever reason. And now you're bringing in some additional classifying information. You would want to consider whether you were about to overwrite something or simply append, and maybe you definitely wanted to do one or not the other. So do read those. And then we'll say next. And then the only thing that you probably will change, for whatever reason, I find that it works better if you say as names as opposed to the default of hierarchical names. And then it's saying, where are you going to put these cases? And it's by default going under cases. So leave that as it is. Probably leave that as well, and then hit finish. And what should happen is now we have a case for each of these people, and each of these people have, each of these people have the characteristics from that same spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet itself is re-represented here. So again, Anna with these characteristics. And something didn't happen, and I think I missed a step. So always fun to do these things live. What is supposed to happen is that these will automatically tie themselves because the information in the first column matches. So Anna, it should have automatically tied to this data set, and it didn't, and I can't recall right off the top of my head which step I missed. So I'm going to show you how to manually tie them together, but it kind of should have happened automatically. All I have to do in this case is, right click on, I'll have to do it 6 or 7 times here, but I'm clicking on Anna and I'm saying code, and this time I'm not going for a node, which is what I've been showing you so far, but I'm going to go down here to cases and choose Anna. And now these are not the thematic nodes, but now it tells me that something has linked up. And now anything that I do with Anna's document will also have the characteristics of Anna. So her age group, the fact that she's a student, she has done volunteering work, that kind of thing. And so in this case, I will have to do that with each of these. It's certainly not an onerous step, but you know, it would have been nice had it done it the way I'd intended. And I think like maybe when I imported my classification sheet, I forgot to highlight these things, or I didn't point at them at some point. So that's what's happening there. So I'm just going to tie these all together. Ken and Mary, and then I actually have an extra one that I use sometimes but didn't in this case. So Nick and Phoebe. Okay, so now all of my documents have these characteristics, and I would then be able to address them in this type of query, or any other type of query for that matter. This is just the easiest way I find to get into that. Now, I can't actually show you anything here because in this type of query, like the best I could do, I could maybe run a query and say, show me all the males and all the females, or all the older people, all the younger people, but there'd be no content there because I haven't done any coding yet. So there's nothing here under the nodes, under the codes. And so what I thought I'd do is show you the garbage, if you will, that is the automatic thematic coding So this is what I hinted this morning that you shouldn't use, but it will do me the one service of giving me some content to look at. But then I'll also show you the better way to do that, to use automatic coding. So let me show that. The way NVivo wants to work in this particular case is if I were to highlight any or all of the documents and then choose auto code, it's this identify themes that I'm telling you, again, do as I say, not as I do. You're never going to get anything useful out of this identify themes, but I'm doing it anyway. We're going to come back to speaker name, and I'll mention style or structure. These are ways that you can tell NVivo who is doing the speaking in, say, a focus group transcript. You do have the ability to say, even though there are 6 names on this page, only give me the content from this person and then this person separately, and pay attention to that. So we'll come back to that. So I'm going to say next, and it's identifying the themes, and what you're about to see is basically a keyword search. So you're going to see stuff where the words appeared frequently, and then, as I think they call them, action phrases. And you'll also find that there isn't a large number of them. And things like 10 years time and 10 years time, obviously those should have been together. So there's not much you can do with this. You could say, okay, well, this whole etc. thing, where did it just go? That seems pretty garbage, so I'm just going to unselect that. So play with it if you want to. Decide if you want code sentences or paragraphs, and then finish. And what's going to happen is over here under nodes, first of all, I get a couple of little graphic visualizations, but now under nodes and auto-coded themes, I have some of those same themes. I can see them here, but again, I'm sorry to hit you over the head with this. Don't do this. You're never going to find something that's relevant to the research that you care about. But what I could do is say, so this theme of current time use, I could run a query against that. And in this case, I'm showing off the right click again, and I have the ability to query here. Cases coded at this node. So pretty similar to the results of what else I've seen. Actually, I don't know what this is, but it tells me who has done, who fits that criteria. So of all of the people, these 6 people. Or I could go up to the Explore tab and run that same crosstab query. I could say, for current time use, show me the age groups. So just kind of leave it at the default there, run the query, throw some color in there, and it looks like 2 of the people in the 20-year-olds talked about it, 1 of the 60 plus, and 3 of the 30 to 39. So immediately I'm able to make use of those demographic or classifying pieces of information and use that within a query. Let me pause, take a sip, and give you a chance to ask questions. Again, I'm fully aware that this is kind of like throwing a lot of stuff at you, but I want you to see the capabilities of the software, not quite as much remembering exactly how to do it, but still ask questions if you've got them, please. And I see a missed question from Joanne from earlier. Can I compare themes or keywords from different data sources? So interview transcripts and literature. I believe so. So that would be, I don't have different data sources here. I think I can have 2 open. So let me jump back to the sample data project and confirm that. I think it's coming. Yep, there we go. Oh, I left the password in. Thought I took it out. All right, so here I've got interviews and literature. Yeah, those are the two examples that she gave. So to compare, let's see if I went to query, so explore and themes or keywords. I wonder if on the matrix coding it would do it. So two ways. I'm hesitating because I know I could go to select items and choose, say, all the interviews or pick out the interviews, but that would still leave them all together. So yeah, let's only look at those. So interviews and literature are the only things. I'm not including the news articles or the social media. But then rather than dragging nodes into this area, I believe, well, I still would want to do the nodes in one side. So let's do some of them. You don't ever really want to do all of the nodes unless you don't have a ton, because it will do it, but it'll both be very busy and also take an awful long time. So here I've got 3 or 4 nodes, but then over here, I think I can choose again to say, split them up by the interviews and the literature. So let's see how that looks. Looks like it's doing the individual people, so it's not exactly right. And then, so I'm saying and coding at rows and columns. So I may come back and play with that, but let's see what we've got here. So first thing is some colors, maybe transpose. Yeah, so I've got everything on the screen. Here are my nodes. And the only, I guess we'd want to figure out, first of all, what are the, in this case, only 2 documents that appeared in the literature area, or just the one? Oh, right, because I stuck the PCCF in with the interviews. So yes, the information is here. Doesn't look like it's a perfect way to compare. And in this case, in fact, none of those themes appear to have shown up in the analyzing estuarine shoreline information. So there may be a better way to do that comparison, but at the very least, this is a way to do that. Does that answer what you thought you were asking, Joanne, or is that not at all on target? Now I'm putting her on the spot. All right, fair enough. I wanted to show you the better use of auto coding. So again, rather than, yes, you're saying one could also run different queries on different data sources. Certainly could. I was hoping to be able to see something just on one screen, but it might make more sense to simply run that query a couple of times and then look back and forth. I haven't shown you, but it is possible to save the results to the project, so you could easily come back to it at a later point. Those live down here under the search area, and again, because we're in the sample data project, I can see some other examples. And in fact, maybe this is a good example. So here they have run some sort of a coding comparison. Oh no, these are 2 different coders. So Wanda is a researcher and Effie is a researcher. They each did some coding on Henry and Thomas's interview. I guess Henry is the interviewee or interviewer. But what that particular query allows you to do is see whether or not the 2 different coders agreed and picked the same text, if you will. Let's see if any of these others look more appropriate. Yeah, it doesn't look quite like what Joanne was asking about in any of these examples. But again, just just sometimes even useful to look at what types of queries could be done. So whatever this is that I just picked, natural environment and the economy down east. So those are two different node structures showing the overlap. I don't think I did that type of query, so that can be useful. So wherever habitat appears and fishing or aquaculture, here are the 13 references that relate to that. So again, just the idea that NVivo makes it very easy to dive back into your data to pull out something either that you found that's interesting or just something that you want to summarize or revisit. Always kind of a fun ability, if you will. What I was about to show you, though, is a better use of automatic coding. So if I had a focus group transcript, which, surprise, surprise, I do. I just have to find it. Workshops, it's right here. Can't remember which one I wanted to use, but all I have to do in this case, I'm just going to drag it in, and I'm being sloppy by doing it in the sample data set. Or the sample project. That's fine though. I can rename it. I can tell myself something about it. But if we take a look at it, what we should find is that I have a whole series of names. This is one way that you could format your document. I've got Gina, who has been labeled as AAA, Gladdy as BBB, nobody, Yang Kui as CCC, et cetera, et cetera. And as I go through this document, I see who is doing the speaking. So oftentimes, I guess for security's sake, for confidentiality's sake, this information would probably be held outside of the project. You'd have a cheat sheet somewhere telling you who AAA was, but that way, you know, this kind of remains a little bit more anonymous, except for the fact that they introduce themselves here. So, you know, you might tweak that up a little bit as well. But the idea here is that through the use of auto coding, you can tell NVivo to separate these pieces of text. And the reason that might be useful is because you could say anytime AAA was doing the speaking, that is Gina, and Gina has the following characteristics. By the same token, if you were doing a word frequency query, you could then say, don't show me the words spoken throughout the entire document, just show me the words spoken by Gina or Gina and whomever else. So we have this particular document open. It doesn't have to be open. We can do it while it's even closed, but if I can unselect it, if I auto code or go to auto code here, and this time auto code by speaker name, the way this gets set up is, again, it kind of shows you a view of the document, but what you do is enter the names of the speakers, or in this case, the codes for the speakers. So when I say AAA, what it's supposed to do is highlight, there it is, okay, it's working. Didn't show up at the top, but it highlights, first of all, the AAA, and then any text that follows. So in this case, it's not helpful to us because it's highlighting everything. But as soon as we start to introduce the other speakers, you'll see that AAA is now green, BBB is orange, and now it starts to understand or recognize that there are different people speaking throughout the document. I could and should also add moderator. And I think that's everybody. And so always a good idea. Oh, there's an EEE that I missed. And an FFF. So you do want to make sure you get all of them, otherwise it's not worth doing it at all. But this also does show you that if you do have a transcript, especially a focus group transcript, you do want to take the time ideally before you bring it into NVivo, to label each of the speakers. So you do have the ability to tell NVivo, hey, each of these people is a different speaker, and I might want to care about who is doing the speaking. And I'm going to assume that I got them all. For some reason, this is really starting to bog down. I could either create a new classification or add these to an existing classification. Because I'm in the sample project here, I guess it doesn't really matter. I'll go ahead and create a new one though, and call this focus group. Where do you want to put it? In cases, that's fine. And so now I don't have the attributes yet, so this might be where I would do that manually. I'm not going to at this time, but at the very least, I have each and every one of these people individually, and I believe if I double click on any one of them, I should be able to simply pluck out the text spoken by that individual. So again, once I've assigned the attributes, or I don't even have to, but at the very least, I could now do, say, a word cloud just on CCC's speech. And maybe I compare that to, and in fact, I'd want to get rid of CCC as the word, introduce that. Oh, I didn't show you how to do that either. Introduce that to the stop words list. And the way you do that is simply by right-clicking and saying add to stop words list. And that's not going to mess up the fact that that is somebody's name, but what it will do is get rid of the kind of label, if you will. And so now I can find out that the most frequently occurring word whenever whoever CCC talks is make, followed by beauty. And I can confirm that over here. And then maybe DDD is something significantly different, maybe. And again, I'll want to add DDD to the stop words list. Looks like make is still up there. So for what it's worth, but it does at least give you the ability to flip back and forth between a couple of different users. I have 50 versus 1,000 here, which is why they look a little bit different there. But so that's the other type of query that you could run. The very last thing, I'm just going to squeak it in, is to show you when bringing in a survey data set, the fact that NVivo does treat it differently. So in this case, import survey, or if I had been dragging it in, it would do the same sort of thing. But I just want to show you the steps to show you that it is a little bit different. And I think this is the same data set that we had in here already. But in this case, and I think I mentioned earlier that NVivo will basically walk you by the hand if you've collected all the demographic information as part of a survey. So this information is already in tabular format, and it's telling you what it's about to do. And basically, once again, it gives you a representation of the data set and then gives you a chance to decide what information to bring in, how to deal with it. And I mentioned, for instance, this return date. You could say, yeah, that's not relevant to me at all. The closed-ended data are those classifying pieces of information. So things like age, gender, education, or how they responded to that particular part of the survey. Anything that is marked by NVivo as open-ended is going to be codeable, meaning you can highlight that text and assign it to a node. So I'll say next, you would uncheck each of those, and it's going to move along. And I think it'll give me a couple of results there. And so now I have that same information again. So anything that's in kind of a gray look is not codable. I can't interact with it, but it is assigned to anything that I do code to that individual who made that response. So again, a whirlwind tour. Our time officially is up. I don't have another appointment right now, so I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you might have. I will be sending out the link to the recording, which I will stop at the moment.